Let's talk about something we all take for granted until we hear a scary snap. Our bones. So, have you ever broken a bone? Maybe you took a nasty spill on a skateboard or, I don't know, missed a step down the stairs or something. It hurts, and you might even end up in a cast. The cast itches, and of course it ruins your outfit. It's the worst, right? But for some people, it's way more serious. We're talking about huge bone defects from, say, car accidents or from surgeries to remove diseases like bone cancer, also known as osteosarcoma. These aren't just simple breaks, they're massive gaps that the body can't fix on its own. And this isn't a rare problem. It's a global crisis affecting nearly 2 billion people worldwide. It's the leading cause of disability, and it's a public health emergency hiding in plain sight. So, the million-dollar question is, how do you get the body to rebuild something as complex as bone when a major piece is missing? Well, the classic solutions, say like bone grafts, where we borrow bone from another part of the body, can be like robbing Peter to pay Paul. They create a second injury site. And we've used donor bones, risking rejection, and we've tried metal and plastic implants that never truly become part of you and you risk them failing. So, what if? What if we could give the body a high-tech instruction manual and the perfect building materials to rebuild itself? That's where the absolutely mind-blowing world of nanotechnology comes in. Now, before I continue, there are a few terms you need to know. First off, nanoparticles. Think of these as tiny, tiny Lego bricks, so small that millions could fit on the head of a pin. We can design these Lego bricks to do specific, amazing jobs inside your body. Next up, biomimetic, which is just a fancy word for copying nature. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to copy the brilliant original design of your actual bones and tissues. And last but certainly not least, bone scaffolds. This is the coolest one. Imagine a temporary biodegradable construction site for your bone. It holds the space open and gives your bone cells a structure to climb on, like scaffolding on a skyscraper, so they know exactly where to build. And for years we've struggled to create the perfect scaffold. Too weak, too foreign, too passive. But now, we are learning to build at nature's scale. We are entering the nanoscale. And at its core, nanobiotechnology is all about using these incredibly small materials to interact with biology on its own terms. And the applications are everywhere. From targeted delivery to new diagnostic tools, it's a huge field that just keeps on growing. Currently, researchers are creating scaffolds that, in animal studies, have been shown to kill over 90% of bone cancer cells in a dish, while simultaneously promoting new bone growth. That's not just a treatment. That's a two-in-one special. They are active, intelligent construction sites. They can attract the right cells, deliver growth factors directly to the foramen, and even stand guard against infection. It's this kind of thing that shows we're not talking about small improvements here, but a complete shift in how we approach healing. And that brings us into specific nanosolutions we're talking about today, what they're made out of, and how they came to be. Take it away, Kevin.
Engineering the silver nanoscaffold. Hello. We will now look at the formulation of the silver nanoparticle scaffolds. The basic requirements for the synthesis process include a precursor salt, a reducing agent, and a stabilizer. When choosing the method to use, one should ensure that it guarantees both efficacy and biocompatibility, often referred to as the biological route or green synthesis. This helps to avoid harsh chemicals while relying instead on non-toxic chemicals that then reduce chances of toxicity. For our example, we'll use chitosan, a natural and biocompatible polysaccharide commonly used in tissue engineering. It is extracted from chitin, which can be found in shellfish shells and fungi. To formulate the nanoparticles, a solution of chitosan is prepared and then freeze-dried to remove the solvent and create a 3D scaffold. We then embed the silver nanoparticles into the scaffold, a process called in situ synthesis. This means that we form and grow the nanoparticle inside the already formed scaffold. We simply immerse a porous scaffolds directly in the silver nitrate solution. In this reaction, chitosan also acts as a reducing agent to convert the silver ions into silver nanoparticles, forming them directly within the scaffold. This removes the need for any additional reducing agents required in other methods. The amine and hydroxyl groups on the chitosan backbone act as chelating agents for the silver ions. They perform a mild reduction reaction, converting the positive silver ions into neutral silver nanoparticles. Because this happens on the polymer chain itself, the particles are pinned in place. This prevents them from agglomerating into large clumps and ensures a uniform distribution throughout the implant. We then perform a stringent purification, in which the scaffold is treated with sodium hydroxide and thoroughly washed to remove all unreacted silver ions. This step serves two purposes. First, it neutralizes any residual acid from the initial solution, stabilizing the scaffold structure. Second, and most importantly, it removes all unreacted silver ions. We want the particles to remain, but free silver ions can be toxic to healthy cells. So this washing step ensures the final composite is within the safe therapeutic window for implantation. For additional properties like drug delivery, the silver nanoparticles can be functionalized, that is, chemically attaching chemotherapy drugs for the localized treatment, for example in postoperative osteosarcoma. This allows for a mechanism known as localized sustained release. Instead of flooding the patient's whole body with chemotherapy, the scaffold releases the drug directly at the tumor resection site over time.
Alright, so Professor Kevin just showed you how to build this incredible chitosan silver nanoparticle scaffold, basically, a biomedical construction site loaded with microscopic silver bullets. But here's the thing. Why go through all that trouble? Why not just use plain chitosan? Two key challenges. Infection, without protection. Bacteria turn your scaffold into their home instead of yours. Signaling, a passive scaffold just sits there, it doesn't tell your cells to start building bone. Picture this. You've just had major surgery to fill a massive bone defect. The surgeon places a beautiful scaffold inside, and then bacteria crash the party. I'm talking about nasty ones like Staphylococcus aureus. You know it as staph. To bacteria, your new scaffold is a 5-star hotel. Here's the terrifying part. These bacteria build something called a biofilm, a slimy fortress that antibiotics can't penetrate. Once it forms, the implant fails. More surgery. Back to square one. So how do silver nanoparticles fight back? Here's the brilliant engineering. The silver nanoparticles don't dump all their silver at once. That would be toxic. Instead, they undergo controlled dissolution. The chitosan matrix acts like a slow-release reservoir. Moisture gradually oxidizes the silver surface, releasing silver ions steadily over days to weeks. Studies show about 66% of silver ions release within 24 hours, then continue at lower levels for sustained protection. These ions launch a multi-target attack. They punch holes in bacterial membranes, scramble DNA replication, and jam essential enzymes. Research demonstrates over 99.99% reduction in drug-resistant MRSA biofilm formation on silver-modified surfaces. But here's what most people don't realize. Silver nanoparticles don't just prevent infection, they actively promote bone growth. How? Through cell signaling pathways. When your bone stem cells, called mesenchymal stem cells, contact the scaffold surface, the silver nanoparticles activate a receptor called integrin alpha-LPHA5. This triggers a signaling cascade. The MAPK-ERK pathway gets switched on, which then activates RUNX2, the master switch for bone formation. The result? Your stem cells produce more BMP, bone-building proteins, more alkaline phosphatase, a mineralization enzyme, and more collagen, the protein scaffold of bone itself. Studies show a 2.5-fold increase in stem cell proliferation with silver nanoparticles. So this single device pulls double duty. Job 1. The porous chitosan guides your bone cells exactly where to build, and dissolves away as real bone replaces it. Job 2. Silver nanoparticles stand guard against infection while simultaneously telling your stem cells, build more bone faster. That's not just treatment, that's intelligent regeneration.
So after hearing how the scaffold is built and how it functions, my part focuses on what this actually translates to in performance and outcomes. From a mechanical standpoint, incorporating silver nanoparticles fundamentally improves scaffold behavior. Even at low concentrations, AJNP-reinforced scaffolds show up to a 6-fold increase in compressive strength compared to polymer scaffolds alone. That matters because large bone defects aren't just biological problems, they're mechanical ones. A stronger scaffold maintains defect space, supports load, and creates a stable environment for regeneration. That stability directly affects cell behavior. Mesenchymal stem cells on AGNP-containing scaffolds show significantly higher osteogenic commitment, with key bone markers increasing 2 to 3 times within a few weeks. So instead of slow or disorganized repair, the scaffold actively pushes cells towards structured bone formation. Now, while the antimicrobial mechanism has already been explained, the key benefit here is reliability. By limiting bacterial colonization from the start, the scaffold avoids one of the biggest causes of implant failure. That means the mechanical and regenerative benefits we just talked about actually get the time they need to work. This becomes especially important in post-tumor defects, like after osteosarcoma resection. These environments are unstable, inflamed, and high risk. Multifunctional scaffolds designed for these cases don't just support regeneration, they reduce residual tumor activity while still promoting new bone growth. In preclinical models, that translates into higher bone volume, thicker trabeculi, and cleaner healing compared to conventional scaffolds. So overall, the benefit isn't just strength or regeneration or protection on their own, it's consistency. These scaffolds create an environment where bone repair can proceed efficiently, predictably, and with fewer complications, which is exactly what's needed in complex defects.
Now, let's move on to case study and proven results. We've talked about how electroactive materials help bone heal, so now let's look at what actually happens when we test them in real models. The example we'll be talking about in this video comes from a Nature Communications study on bone regeneration. In this study, the researchers designed a special scaffold with ultra-thin silver nanowires embedded inside a collagen-based structure, so it mimics both the architecture and the electrical behavior of natural bone. The results were pretty striking. They called this system SP-EMS, which stands for Self-Promoted Electroactive Mineralized Scaffold. First, the scaffold stays electrically active over time. As the silver nanowires undergo a very mild corrosion reaction, they generate tiny microcurrents, around 4 microamps, without needing any external device. These microcurrents are enough to activate calcium channels in stem cells and push them toward bone formation on their own. Second, the system was tested in 3 different animals: rats, rabbits, and even dogs. So we're not just looking at small proof-of-concept experiments. The scaffold worked consistently in large, clinically relevant models as well. Third, the silver does 2 jobs at once. It kills bacteria, and it also helps stem cells differentiate into bone-forming cells. So why is this such a big deal? Bone defects, especially infected ones, are notoriously difficult to heal. But the scaffold doesn't just fill space, it actually heals bone, guiding stem cells through electrical stimulation. And what's even more impressive is that it still works in infected defects, where most materials fail. That's because the silver nanowires release ions that directly kill bacteria, giving the scaffold built-in antimicrobial power. In terms of clinical relevance, the scaffold shows several key advantages that matter for real-world bone repair. First, it provides stable electrical activity. The scaffold continues generating microcurrents for 2 to 3 weeks in vivo, which is exactly the early healing window when electrical cues have the biggest impact on stem cell-driven bone repair. And importantly, it maintains this activity even while gradually degrading. Second, as we've discussed in this video, It effectively offered strong antimicrobial protection without requiring external antibiotics, something that traditional bone grafts still depend on. Third, the scaffold delivers consistently strong regeneration across animal models. Rats showed about 96 to 97% defect closure, including roughly 89% even in infected defects. Rabbits reached around 98% bone fill, and dogs demonstrated nearly complete vertical bone regeneration, some of the closest results we have to human-scale healing. Finally, the system is both biocompatible and degradable. It's safe for surrounding tissues, and it naturally breaks down over about 2 to 3 weeks as new bone forms, leaving no permanent material behind. Taken together, these features, stable electrical cues, antimicrobial activity, strong multi-species regeneration, and safe degradation, highlight why self-promoted electroactive scaffold is considered highly promising for future clinical translation.
Okay, so at this point, it sounds like we've basically solved bone defects forever, right? Not quite. All the examples we've talked about so far, like the chitosan silver scaffold and the fancy 3D printed composites, are incredibly promising, but most of them still live in a very controlled world, like cell cultures and animal models. They have yet to get to clinical testing. There are a few big limitations that stop them from getting to that point. What are the limitations, you ask? Scaffolds are dumb, or to be more specific, the drug release is often pretty dumb. Once you implant the scaffold, it just starts releasing drugs immediately, with no feedback loop to stop, even if the local tissue does not need it that much. Second, long-term safety isn't fully understood. For example, silver is great at killing bacteria, but we have to be careful about what it does to our own cells, especially stem cells, if the dose or the exposure time is wrong. Many reviews highlight this gap because we still don't have enough long-term clinical data for many nanoscaffold designs. The third limitation is that most of these nanoscaffolds have complex designs and are hard to manufacture and standardize. It's one thing to print one perfect scaffold for a mouse, but it's another to make hundreds of patient-specific implants that all behave consistently. So where do we go from here? One of the most exciting directions is making these scaffolds smarter and more responsive to their environment. You've already heard how a difficult bone defect site isn't like normal bone. In severe trauma, the microenvironment can become more inflamed and often more acidic than healthy tissue. That's why researchers are designing pH-responsive scaffolds that basically listen to their environment and then release drugs when the pH goes down. You can imagine combining that idea with the silver system we've been talking about. And pH is only one trigger. Some newer scaffolds react to magnetic fields, light, or even ultrasound to turn drug delivery, heat, or electrical signals on and off in a controlled way. So the future isn't just more nanoparticles, it's smarter scaffolds that sense, decide, and respond. But here's the catch. You do not get that future by having one type of scientist in the room. This is deeply interdisciplinary. To actually move from mouse models to real patients, you need material scientists and chemists to tune the scaffold matrix, surface chemistry, degradation, and how things like silver or growth factors are incorporated. You need nanotechnologists and pharmaceutical scientists to engineer responsive release so that therapeutic actually comes out when it's supposed to. You need mechanical and biomedical engineers to design the geometry and mechanical strength so the scaffold survives real-world loads and matches the patient's anatomy. So when we talk about nanotechnology and bone regeneration, we're not just talking about tiny particles. We're talking about teams, materials plus biology plus engineering plus medicine, all working on the same problem from different angles. If we can get that collaboration right, then the chitosan silver scaffold you saw today is not the end of the story. It's version 1.0. The first step towards smart, responsive implants that not only fill the defect and fight infection, but actively sense their environment, adapt to it, and help the body rebuild bone after a complex injury. So in the end, nanotechnology is not just about putting smaller particles into bone. It's about building smart, responsive scaffolds that only work because material scientists, engineers, biologists, and clinicians designed them together. If we get that collaboration right, the silver scaffold we showed today is just the first draft of what bone defect reconstruction can become.